Very well. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for attending these sections that my colleagues and I from GPEG has put together with great love and dedication to tell you about how to bring the global into the local classrooms. Transbordering planning, locating the global in the local. I want for you to take away these 4 simple lessons, and maybe they are common sense and common knowledge already, but it's good to refresh it. The local and the global are imbricated, as we have talked about all day today. We live in a global world, and that global word that we don't use a lot as we should is also meant to reveal that interactivity, interscalarity, and relationality that Farnak spoke about. Second, people cross more than country boundaries. We live in a transbordering world full of borders that we cross regularly. ICTs, information and communication technologies, allow us to communicate across the world. I don't have to insist on this because we are all teaching online, and we know that we can have students from across the country and across the world. So we don't need travel to bring the global into the local. And there is planning literature and tools abundantly available for us to do so, as Eugene and others have demonstrated today as well. So for the first one, the local and the global are imbricated. We live in a global world. I'm going to offer this example of a case study examined by Gerardo Sandoval and Luz Hernandez, in which they analyzed the developmental conditions in a small town, Postville, in Iowa, and how we see that it was linked to dynamics and migration coming from Guatemala and very small villages in Guatemala. They refer particularly to how women and mothers transform their gender role and their motherhood, which they call transnational motherhood, to address one enormous challenge that they have with the greatest of rates that occurred in the United States by that time in 2008, that detained more than 300 immigrants that were unauthorized serving in these meatpacking industries, and that mostly deported all of them, except for this group of mothers that could mobilize with the help of allies in the local communities their motherhood to resist their deportation and finally realize for everybody involved how interconnected they all were in this small town, locals and migrants, newcomers and old-timers in there. So this had implications for housing, education, motherhood or parenthood, community development along many lines. Second, people cross more than country borders. We live in a transbordering world, and we all cross borders of race and ethnicity and gender and religious and political affiliations all the time, and migrants do that on a more regular basis. And that was demonstrated, as Farnak explained in detail, in this small town of Illinois, Bearstown, in which migrants from Mexico and Tonga, but also Puerto Rico and Cuba and African Americans from across the region confluenced there to support the community development of the town that otherwise would have died down. And that in turn transformed all of their institutions, their health services, their recreational and social practices, their traditions and celebrations, their housing, their education. And in this map, it is demonstrated how we see that congregations of so-called minoritized groups, in this case, Latinos and immigrants, not only congregate in large cities, such as in Chicago, in the case of Illinois, but elsewhere across the state of Illinois and across the country. So we need to identify that way of integrating or realizing the global into the local that we have in our midst. The New York Times published this interesting article in which they say the real war isn't at the border, the one that we concentrate too much on. And of course we have a real war at the border, but that real war has transformed into a figurative war that now goes across the country. It's everywhere. And so if we only focus in the one at the border, we're fighting the wrong one. We need to realize the borders that we have in the midst of our communities and how we see that through planning we can overcome them to integrate us better into a more solidaristic community. Third, ICTs, information and communication technologies, allow us to communicate across the world without traveling. We do that through online teaching, so we can integrate international speakers into our conversations in our courses. We can plan to teach courses together, and there are some universities that are having particular support for that type of so-called global classrooms and other names that these programs now have, in which teachers are allowed to support classes that are taught with international colleagues. But then we also have resources such as, in this case, this is a shopping mall in Los Angeles that copies different bits and pieces of architecture and spaces from across Mexico. And it has become a hub of attraction, not only for Mexicans and people of Latinx descent, but others in the region, in which they can transform their traditions or reenact their traditions, their identity, their connections to their original town or the towns of their ancestors, and in which they can also transform their habits of inhabiting these places, communicating with others, relationing themselves with others, but also with others across national borders, because it turns out that you can go to retail in this particular shopping mall and buy a refrigerator or even a car that it will be delivered to your relatives in Mexico or Central America. So transnational transactions, commercial transactions, remittances, fads, cultural, consumption habits, and all the sort is happening across the localities that we inhabit. In this particular shopping mall, Mexicans and others can also, again, join together to celebrate folkloric festivities, religious festivities, and also opportunities for raising community and social and human capital, such as in the case of this binational Week for Health, in which the Mexican consulate and the California government joined together to support better health for their people. And fourth and last, there is planning literature and tool available to present the global in the classroom, as others, Eugene and others have spoken about. We have the Global Planning Education Interest Group that supports a library that is online. We also have tons of articles. I bring about these that Leslie and others provided to us, in which they have specific examples and step-by-step lessons on how to use deliberative learning and case study approaches to teach international planning. And they also offer a library of case studies by location and by topics that is online, in which you can either design an entire international planning course with them or sprinkle these case studies according to location and topic in different core courses that you have in your curriculum. So those are my 4 lessons for today. Again, we live in a global world, we live in a transbordering world, we have ICTs, and we have planning literature and tools available to bring the global into our classrooms. Thank you.